And we should be live. And welcome. Welcome to the first Doing Our Bit IGDA Climate SIG stream of the year. I'm Megan. We have Benn Wiebe here and Andrew
Hello.
Brunwald. Uh,
Hello.
Hello. Uh, this uh, this is an extension of the IGDA Climate SIG. So the IGDA, if you aren't familiar, is the International Game Developers Association. The Climate SIG is the Climate Special Interest Group. We are a group of game developers, academics, researchers, anyone who is working together to figure out gaming's response to climate change, supporting climate mitigation, everyone working together to have a safe place, especially on our Discord, to discuss eco minded games, support the games in this industry, support individuals like Ben, Andrew, lots of wonderful people who are all working together to do what we can. Andrew, take it from here.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm the founder of a little game studio down in Bristol, UK, making games about ecological impacts and sort of integrating the low-level code of nature into commercial scale games. So today we're going to talk to Benn Wiebe. He's a social impact specialist who serves as the strategy and corporate partnerships officer at the games mental health charity Safe in Our World. He's also the vice chairman of HF Productions and serves on the board as an advisor to Think Film, Global Environment Media, Sci Society, Treun House Atelier, Climate Culture Hub, Yeah Impact, and the Hollywood Climate Summit. So he gets around. So we're going to have a good hour or so talking about the many intersections of gaming, climate, and mental health, as there's a lot to get into. And with that, Ben, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself and the many things you're doing these days.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I come at this whole conversation from working in film and games for a long time. And I really started realizing after I worked on shows like the Real Housewives franchise that I wasn't really doing anything positive with my work efforts. Actually, the opposite. I felt like I was feeding toxins to the masses. So then I really started wanting to figure out how we could utilize stories and films and games to talk to people about social responsibility and how we can influence bigger issues and stuff. Yeah, and so here we are. So now I just tried to join groups like IGDA Climate SIG and Playing for the Planet and figure out how we can mobilize people together for this mission. So yeah.
Nice. And also big ups for Playing for the Planet and the Clean Game Jam, which is coming up soon. So I met you at Develop last year.
That's right.
We got to chatting away in a very, very, very warm expo area.
Yeah,
With
that's
everyone
right.
boothing and doing the game industry grind and spending a lot of hours working in an overheated area for the sake of their company, which brings out some mental health undertones there. So saw you at that booth and was curious about it because I'm a neurodiverse person myself. I have ADHD, so I'm very we're overrepresented in the gaming industry and in gamers for a reason. So I was like, there's my people. How lovely chat. But for the people who aren't familiar with Safe in Our World, tell me a little bit more about how Safe in Our World is sort of out there in the world. How do you manifest? What do you do? What is the work? And how can people kind of like get involved or benefit from Safe in Our World?
Yeah, so Safe in Our World is the mental health charity for games. So our mandate is exclusively about working with the games industry. And the central mandate is to help people who make games. So the focus is on players too, but really our methodology, and really my personal one too, belief is that if we can build and nurture healthier environments for people who make games, then that will intrinsically trickle down to impacting more positive environments for players too. So through the work that we do in terms of providing mental health first aid training, through consulting on things like accessibility guidelines and trying to help game companies create more preemptive strikes against toxicity and stuff like that, we've really seen that there is no coincidence that the game companies that have problems with a toxic work culture also happen to have very toxic issues with their player bases, right? And companies that seem to have a pretty healthy work culture um, rarely seem to have those same issues with their relationship with their players. So so I think the two really go hand in hand, and I think that's from a surface level, that's all that really needs to be said when we talk about why we should convince people that prioritizing the health of people is a good thing, and making games should be fun in the end, right? This is fun, creative work. So the environments that we instill, to be able to do that, should be ones that are full of trust and open ideation and thought. So
Mm.
so I mean that's the goal, and to join our core program called Level Up is free for game companies. Um, so that's the best way to get people, excited and not wanting to shut down the conversation when it comes to, what is the ask of them.
Awesome. And yeah, oh, sorry, I'm catching myself on your I'm hearing myself through your laptop, so I'll try to back it out a little bit. Um, so yeah, I honestly could have used Safe in Our World back in the day. I was in the belly of the beast, working in big AAA, QA, outsource, long hours, low pay, layoff in November, Merry Christmas, and game's gone gold. We don't need you anymore. Like that, the kind of industry horror story was very true for me, very much at the beginning. And I turned out, I dropped out of that because I was like, no, no, this will mentally destroy me. I can see the spiral forming. So I left to go into sort of traditional stuff, fintech, medtech, health tech, that kind of thing. Found similar issues.
Mhm.
Pay was better, but standard corporations should care more about their people thing here. But coming back to the industry, older with more experience and all these things, and a bit more handle on my own mental health, or at least an understanding of it, seeing the unique intersection of people who make games need to be cared for in their mental health and need to have that be front and center, or their craft will suffer immensely, and
Yeah.
thusly their players might, just to your point. Um, yeah, I find it incredibly important. So now that I'm running a studio, it's just been priority number one. Like if they're not mentally safe, then how can I expect their best? How can I possibly
Right.
expect their creative best to come out if they don't feel just at least safe at work, or safe in communicating with people of power, or even if it's perceived power over them, that kind of thing. Um, so we just, I've engaged with so many of the resources from Safe in Our World to use in how I run the studio, and it's just been immensely helpful. Um, you have your gut approach to these things. You have your version of what it's like to, or
Right.
how you'd want to be treated. Honestly, I think that the golden rule, treat people the way you want to be treated, is some of the worst advice ever given, because it just means we project ourselves onto onto other people of like, oh, you
Right.
know,
Before
I'm
we even
ADHD. I don't want to be treated like you. You shouldn't treat me the way I treat you, because I'm going to go about it differently. And I
exactly.
think the message, and I see this coming out of Safe in Our World, is you need to talk to your people and listen. What do they need? Ask them. It's not going to come from a conference talk or some playbook off of a TED talk. You just need to talk to your people and ask what they need.
Yeah, which sounds so simple, right? Whenever anyone says that out loud, but on these census, and the UK and the US census on the games industry shows that the need for more mental health and personal care is twice the national average, right? So right off the bat, though, one of the most common answers is, how often does anyone, let alone a leader, right, or someone who manages you, literally ask you, "Are you okay? What do you need? How is it really going for you?" I mean, we do that socially, right? In many cultures, people say, how's it going? How you doing?" And people say, "I'm good, I'm fine." And after a while, you realize anyone who says good or fine is, it's kind of nonsense, right? It's just a basic, thing we say. It's not really telling you anything. So someone could be having a rough day and they're just like, "I'm fine." It's just a way of not volunteering it. So people routinely say that no one really comes to them in their work environment and really inquires on how they're doing, like if they need anything. And that's the thing, right? If we aren't in a place where there's a work environment that's conducive to feeling like we understand the work, we can handle the work, we feel comfortable talking to, our teammates about technical, aspects of the work and the needs around that. If we can't even get to a place where that's happening smoothly, and leadership is supportive in creating that environment, then how are we ever going to get to the place where we can talk about emotional things and vulnerabilities, right? Which requires way more trust, for people to be willing to talk about that. And that so that's but that's such a common thing people don't think about what it really takes to build trust when it comes to, sociality, right? Yeah.
I've had some, like, how do you sorry, I'm getting the feedback again. Um from hearing myself through your speakers. There we go. Okay. Sorry, folks. Technical things abound, but I've had this kind of, now that I'm the perceived person with power over people, like I do the payroll, I do the things, I'm received differently.
Sure.
I'm used to being the person next to you, not the person above you. So, I would always be talking to people that I would consider just my colleague, not my subordinate, not anything like that. I've just noticed it shifts, even though I've not changed at all in how I talk or my process or anything like
Right.
that. So, how do you think sort of power dynamics, perceived or otherwise, plays into this kind of trust building, especially in game development studios where there is very kind of like siloed, especially larger ones where you see siloed spaces, like there's the art department, there's programming, there's
Right.
sound, there's all these things, and there's various layers of real and perceived authority figures and power figures. How do you actually implement tell me how you're feeling today without it just being okay, boss surveying their subordinates and no one wanting to say anything because, well, that they're your
Right.
boss.
I mean, it's a great question, right? Because even if you do, even if, I mean, your situation is perfect, right? People already know you in one social dynamic, and then that dynamic changes, and all of a sudden you might realize that they respond to you different. They might be less open with you, especially about personal struggles, right, or what they can or can't handle. Um, on the job. And I think uh some of that is about, who we are as a person individually, but I think some of it is a culture that's instilled behaviors. And the most instilled behavior is that we've been trained uh to expect that our personal struggles will be weaponized against us at work. So we are de-incentivized to share because it is akin to complaining, it is akin to weakness, it is akin to, can we really handle this job we've been hired to do, right? And so you might as well assume no one should ever have anything to struggle with because, and so the dynamic could be, yeah, you could be, just as friendly and open and helpful, right? And the dynamic will still change because that's what people have always expect. And I think the best thing that anyone in any, managerial position over anyone else can do is be willing to just continue, especially if you've already done this, continue to show your own vulnerabilities, right? Maybe in a little bit different way, because, I mean, to your point, the dynamic is a bit different. Um, but uh, but because a lot of managers, like anyone who has a hierarchy position, a lot of people are trained, be a brick wall. Do not complain to people that you oversee, which means don't share with them about your personal stuff. I think, and at Safe in Our World, yeah, I think we definitely believe this at our core. I think that's nonsense because it's not akin to complaining when we're addressing concerns about how our life is going and how the work is going and what we need in either case, right? Whether it's work related or not. And most of the time, the two things mesh together constantly because we spend so much of our time in our work life is a majority of our life for most people, right? We spend at least as much time in our work life. So yeah, so the two things are always gonna be combined, and so I think it's completely a fallacy to say and expect anyone to just close themselves off emotionally, because that's going to make everyone else close themselves off emotionally. You are now not available to them to emotionally share anything, right? And if they feel you're closing up, then that gets them closer to that feeling of this could now be weaponized because now they're not sharing. So I guess it's not safe for me to share.
So here, I'm gonna let that echo come through. All right, now, uh, if someone is joining this talk and is either a game developer or someone in a management role, do you have, and you're addressing a really interesting fine line because HR has historically been a role where people think maybe I can trust this person, but typically that role is to protect the business. So, if I'm a developer watching this talk or a manager, do you have any specific examples of how to be more emotionally available and help break down these walls?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question too, right? Because and you make another great point that HR is really not there to support. But HR as a practice is not there to support the individual, right? They are there to protect the company. That's really their number one mission. So yeah, so they're not necessarily the person you want to be expect to be very emotionally available. I mean, if you have really big concerns, like definitely you should feel safe to share them. But I think it's safer to develop other dynamics with people in the company, and especially not just an HR person, right? If that's the only person you have a healthy social dynamic to share, then I definitely recommend you know doing more. But in terms of kind of how to navigate that, I mean, it's tricky, right? Because it depends on the degree of need you have, right? If you're someone who does say have neurodiverse battles, right? And that can in itself, right, run the gamut. I mean, I myself, I have a chronic fatigue syndrome, right? So someone with a condition like that can have days where you absolutely are almost melancholy and you have no energy, and um, uh, it's not connected to anything you've literally done physically that day or the day before, right? So someone who doesn't understand the degree of need that certain people have, right? It changes how they receive what you're giving them. If they might see you come in and you're tired, and they think, well, you got to bring it though. You got to bring that energy. You got to be on when you're here. And it's like, okay, but if you understand the nuance and if people take the time, so that's where there's opportunities for managers uh, to not ever assume, right? It's hard, especially in a big company or you got big teams, right? You don't necessarily have time to do deep dives into everybody's nuance, but it doesn't take much time to do a quick check-in, especially when there are signs. There are always signs when someone's having a hard time. There's never someone who can hide it 100%. No one's that good of an actor, right? Like, you know, yeah. There's always signs. It's also like saying, the the difference between stress and burnout. And we hear a lot about burnout in the industry. And it's like, well, there were signs. Okay. Burnout means you've redlined, like you've possibly been redlining for a while. Okay. And like a car, right? I mean, like you can drive that thing at 85, 90% forever. But if you start redlining, what? You burn the engine, right? You could destroy it like that. So, so there's always signs that people are, being asked to function at high levels for a long time. And I just think the idea of bringing a little bit of vulnerability means, sharing an example, or if someone says, "This is how I'm feeling," repeat that back to them. Like, make it clear that you're actually listening and you heard them. You know, it's like if you listen to some conversation, someone said, someone says, "How was your day?" And they're like, "Oh, my day's actually pretty horrible. Like, it's just not working out today." And the person just says, "That's great." Like, you know what I mean? Like, like they're clearly not listening, right? And then the conversation just ends. And all it really takes to flip that switch is just repeat some of it back. Let them know you're meeting them where they are a little bit. And that doesn't take a lot out of a manager. And it doesn't take a lot of time. Um,
What I'm
because people
hearing, Ben, is we should repeat things back. Sorry,
yes.
I couldn't.
Yes.
I could resist it just to do that. That sounds. These are all good things for a manager. As I was asking the question, I realized we do tend to skew more game developer. This might be really hard for a game developer who's struggling to figure out how do I meet my manager or my boss or my coworker halfway. Of I'm like close to burnout, or I have an immune disorder, or
Yeah.
I have something health or physically or mental or otherwise. Do you have recommendations for how people can throw a, I don't know, an olive branch in that regard?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I usually like recommending, especially if someone does have a very particular need that can be identified, right? Um, to like a good manager should be able to allow that person, especially if they've taken time to actually understand a little bit about how people on their team work, right? If someone goes into it with it's a one size fits all thing, like that's never good. Even if you don't have anyone on your team who identifies as neurodiverse, like that already just doesn't work. And so people need to feel, and that this is again feels like a simple thing that managers can do is supply, the vibe for an environment where it's also safe for people to engage in different work practices. Like there are certain people who do not like being tied to their desk, right? There are people that need to physically be moving around. I am one of those people. Um, physically be moving around in order for it to feel like your brain is completely on, right? And that you can be firing, and also, things like that. Just there are things that seem so simple when people say it out loud, and then they never execute in letting people just do that, right? And but those are a lot of it, and those are a lot of things that can also help, with people who do have issues around anxiety, around burnout. Is they're being most of the time people get that way because they're expected to fit into this box, and then they're told that there's not a lot of wiggle room to get out of that box. You just need to deliver within these parameters, and it's that also doesn't instill trust, regardless of what's going on in our life. That doesn't instill trust. And the reason that we hire people in the first place is that you must have seen enough in them to be like, this person can do it, whatever it is. Yeah, they seem to be on it. They could do this. So then where's the trust, right? If that's what we're trying to set up, and what, whether it's mental health or anything, in the end, that's one of the biggest reasons that people stay in a place. If they feel like they're empowered because people trust them, and that they can also trust the people around them as well, right? Like that's the healthiest dynamic you can have, because as soon as that's broken, it's not like a puzzle. It doesn't just go back together again.
Agreed. So, want to pivot it a bit towards climate. as we
Yes.
are the climate SIG. So we already know there's a lot of intersection here.
Yeah.
Climate anxiety becoming one of the most quickly adopted terms in psychological circles, like among therapists and stuff,
Sure.
as this thing we don't really have an answer for. Of like, I feel this existential dread about the potential end of the world, and that's following me everywhere I go, including work. And increasingly so among like the next wave of game developers who are young, and almost like being young in today's world almost comes with climate anxiety by default,
Mhm.
because it's something people are increasingly um, aware of, feeling the impact of with extreme weather, even in the sort of global north where things are usually fine, but they're getting worse.
Right.
So, how do you see the effects of climate impacting mental health in the workplace and then also in the games? I mean, your
Yeah.
typical apocalypse narrative hits different these days.
Yeah.
So, thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean there's a lot to unpack there. And I mean right off the bat, the idea of climate anxiety is I think so much based around that yeah, not only is it completely existential, right? We're being reminded all the time that this the end could be near, you know? And so take that and then take that the idea that people are being asked to think globally all the time now, right? And with technology you can be more hooked in to what's going on everywhere in the world, right? But most people don't think that way, right? Most people think provincially. It's easy to call that a bubble, especially for people who travel a lot or have lived many places, but that's not most people. Most people still live in areas they grew up around and don't go traveling all around the world, right? So to them, provincially is a big deal. Like this could affect your city, your your state, so, or there's singular countries, right? That themselves aren't very big, and some people haven't explored outside of that. So when people say we need to be thinking about what's happening to the entire world, that's something that already induces a ton of anxiety because how can you solve that? And there's already so much of a oh, what can one person really do? Even if I do change my habits and be socially responsible, am I even making a dent, right? And so whenever especially in conversation, whenever that comes up, when people say, well, what's the point? What's the point? Because can we really make a difference? Like individually, can we really make a difference? That's when I stop talking about it in the giant global terms. And it's like, well, let's just pull it back and just think locally, right? What can you just think about those same things we're talking about, and let's just think about provincially for your area. How can you, be socially responsible and try and encourage other people, just in your locality, right? And don't necessarily feel like you have to think so much about what everyone else is doing in far off places, right? I think that's a lot of where the anxiety comes from, is that we start giving ourselves this giant plate that we're never going to have control of. We don't even have control of what anyone's going to do anyway, except ourselves. So it's kind of it's not a win-win. It's, kind of setting people up for it to be tough. And mental health is a huge core of the climate issue because, like something I say a lot is one of the big reasons we've got into a climate calamity is that human beings have embraced dominion as if we have dominion over this place, right? But we don't own it, right? We didn't create it. And we can't fix it, by ourselves. We can't just fix it the way we've built cities, you know. And so we don't have dominion over anything here, right? And the sake of dominion means we've disconnected ourselves from nature, from wildlife, from what any of that means. And dominion really means we see ourselves as just having ownership, so those things all serve us. And so from a mental health perspective, that's why I feel like those two, missions are very much combined, because the mentality that's gotten us there is very much about us somehow being kings and queens of this place, which is why we've given ourselves complete permission to just take from it, right? Not share it, we take from it. Um, so, so I think, if people can start thinking about why all these things are intertwined, you know, it's like when people have dogs. When people have dogs, which is a very British thing here. Everyone has dogs here. um, and you know, dogs can tell when their owners are sick and not feeling well. Right? They can tell sometimes before people can. There's fascinating things about every part of life because it's a system where everything has its design and purpose and stuff. And I think um, if we give ourselves the ability to start realizing that, like, we don't have dominion, like, things wouldn't function the way they would if any single species of anything disappeared, right? That would mess up an entire wave, portion of life if even a single species was gone. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but
Yeah,
but I love coming at it. That's the lens I kind of come at it from a lot.
we've kind of adopted a similar lens with the studio where we're like, okay, what are the implied narratives that we often put out in games? It is dominion. It is power
Yeah,
fantasy. It is I own, I take, I create, mine.
sure.
And that kind of solidifies and reinforces that notion that this place is mine and all of its structures are there to serve me. And we kind of sell this. We've built a whole industry on selling
Sure.
agency and ownership on steroids through video games. Of feeling like, oh yeah, that forested landscape, go tear it down and turn it into a war machine. Um, we'll give you points. It'll be great.
Yeah.
Um,
Positive XP.
we'll make the bar go up. It's you're gonna get the dopamine, man. Come do it. So we really think a lot about how do you reverse that narrative. How do you talk about like anti-colonialism? How do you talk about stewardship instead of ownership?
Yes. Love that one.
How do you inject these into there? And I think one of the great sort of I wouldn't call it a genre, but I guess an overall a vibe category of cozy games of
Mhm.
being so much less about mine, and more about just kind of creating a calming sense of something. And I think a great avenue for that is healing environments rather than exploiting them.
Yeah.
And I think games can do a fantastic job where other media can't really do this because there's no interactive aspect of, okay, rewild a place in a video game. That would feel great. That would, push forward that sort of stewardship narrative rather than ownership.
Mm.
Um, and I think that that stewardship idea, I've really come to think of this as stewardship versus ownership and the need to sort of shift to stewardship will just make us better at work as well, where we are stewards of each other, and that's an innate caretaker mindset, rather than like, well, what am I getting? Am I getting the glory? Am I in the credits? Am I getting to work on the best parts? Because a lot of us in development are like, okay, where's my big break? Where's my opportunity to shine? Do I get to work on the main character today, or am I building another rock?
Right.
There is a lot of that, and this, as much as it's fair to want that advancement and everything, it does still, it's still that kind of dominion thing. Like, oh, I owned that part. That was
Sure.
my bit. Um, so yeah, I think both in the making of games and in the themes and ideas the games themselves put out to players, there's a huge need and opportunity to shift, exactly to your point, away from dominion into stewardship, caretaker, be a positive part of this rather than be a beneficiary of these things you've taken.
Mhm.
The sort of like the opposite of your Grand Theft Auto or something like that. where it's still dopamine, but it hits different, especially in this day and age, where it's like we can tell we've been bad caretakers. I think there's this sort of climate
Sure.
guilt that builds up in a lot of people, where it's like, it's like you trashed your apartment. It's like I'm not taking like your plants dying. It's like I'm a bad resident of planet Earth. So, I think we can kind of talk to that through games, and that would pay dividends on our mental health.
Yeah.
Didn't really have a question there. I kind of just sort of
Well,
aggressively agree with the whole
no, but
point
it's really
about
good. I
Dominion.
mean, it's a really good, path you're on, right? Because we can. I mean, the whole thing about stimulating dopamine and tapping into people's naturally competitive fires that are there, right? Both as a player and as a creator, right? They're both equally intense, right? And but we can tap into that without the outcome always being about destruction, right? Or about winning and losing, right? You can be competitive, and it doesn't have to be directly tied to I'm the winner. Or if it is, then it's also not about you know obliteration, right? Like the idea that you can be happy, you can congratulate the person who beat you, and you can show the good sportsmanship to the people you beat, right? That kind of thing. I mean, that's why people appreciate sports, right? I mean, the Olympics as an idea. I mean, there's a lot to be said about the physical practice of the Olympics, but the idea of it, right, was how do we respond to crisis? That competition is a response to conquest, right? You can lay down arms, and there's honor in competing against someone and shaking their hand and saying good job, whether you beat them, they beat you, right? And at the end of the day, like that's a much better practice that still gets your competition out, but it's not about conquest, and it's not about you're just laying waste and there's destruction in the end, or all that. So I think there is a way to still not demonize a whole swath of practice, in like the kind of games we make. But I think there's ways we can just reshape, like you're saying, into one of more stewardship and less about dominion, um, which doesn't take away having your cozy games and having your very competitive games, together. Um, but uh, but I think there is a bit there that I think the tricky part is that we're also talking about an element of denying some of our programming, right? That the competitive nature that does seem, you know, natural, right? Is anything that's competitive has winners and losers, and for a lot of people, I mean, myself included, I love playing cozy games, and I like playing hyper competitive games. I equally they play an equal role in my life, um and yet I recognize that there's a healthy part of competitive games that allow us to let off some steam, right? And there's healthy ways to do that and unhealthy ways to do that, but but I think there is an essential within that, right? That we have, and so I think a big part of the argument is, you know, how do we get more people to the table to think about what concessions we can make within competition, so that we're not necessarily denying our programming, but we're shaping narratives more so that you can have that competitive element without it being about you know congratulating ourselves on dominion and feeding that dominion part of our psyche and personality and stuff. Like one of the things that one of the suggestions I've loved is about mmos, right? Any game that gets a whole group of people together, for one mission, right? And those missions are usually about destruction. They're usually about, oh, we need to destroy a boss, or we need to right? And it's like, well, why couldn't we, reshape some of those and be about it's a way to mobilize people into repairing something, you know, right? Like rewilding, or something like that, right? But you rarely see that as the chosen, method of how do we mobilize people into like a giant team event, but there's just as much competition in that. I mean, you look at popular competitive TV shows, like all the baking shows, for example, right? There's no destruction going on. Those are highly competitive, and intense, and those, some of those shows are great to watch. And the idea is that there's just as much intensity in, these different types of competition where the outcome has nothing to do with destroying anyone else. All right, so I just think a lot of it is just reshaping where we're putting the focus, um, without telling people they're just bad for enjoying the elements within competition.
I want to see oof, sorry, feedback every time. Um, I want to see a battle royale in which you team up with squads to fight fires,
Yes.
and the enclosing circle is a wildfire, and you're saving animals and doing all this thing, and there's still a leaderboard. Like,
See, that
how
sounds
much can
crazy
you
intense. I would
it
play
does.
that.
It's got the intensity. It's got there's and this is why gaming, I feel, is so primed to take the baton from
Yeah.
like David Attenborough and all these other things. They've kind of hit their like diminishing returns on like how much more they can really do in that media format.
Well, they're also
Um,
singular voices, right? You
yeah,
need those vast perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
so I think it's just so rife for innovation to
yeah.
take, like you're saying, that kind of low level code of humanity, that like competitive drive. I want something for myself. I want to acknowledgement, recognition. I want the dopamine. There kind of primal needs being addressed by video games. That's why a lot of people really play them.
Mhm.
And there's so much opportunity in there to kind of flip the narrative while
Yeah.
still addressing the same need.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just like that's part of what the SIG here is for, is to try and get developers thinking about
Mm.
that kind of opportunity. We have this whole environmental game design playbook that is all about, hey, game designer, with your typical game design patterns like set packing and all this, very low level game design stuff. Here's the environmental version of that. Oh, you want to manifest sort of flood management in your game. Okay, here's how to do that. You want to manifest rewilding in your game. Okay, here's some case studies around that. Without like having to have an explosive barrel in there to like knock a bunch of dudes out or something like that.
Right.
So, getting people to take what they already know, like, oh, well, here's a competitive framework for a video game. Okay, what are the thematic contexts of that competition, and how can you still satisfy the need for feeling like I win,
Mhm.
while winning over something that is far more apt for our current situation in the world, where because I think I don't bemoan or sort of think any of the Grand Theft Autos or the Battlefields or the Fortnites need to go away or anything like that.
Sure.
But I think there needs to be a balancing out, because right now, if you're someone who wants to reach for pro environmental or even pro social competition, your options are very limited. There's
Yeah.
all manner of murder simulators out there, but not a whole lot else. So I think it's about stoking the fires of creativity in developers, to think, hey, how can you take this typical format and flip it on its head thematically? Because that can have such massive downstream effects on people's mental health. If you're
Yeah.
spending several hours a day or even a couple hours a week in a murder simulator to get your dopamine, is going to affect you differently than,
Yeah.
say, a game about rewilding under the same framework. If you're paying attention to this stuff in the world, one addresses the other a lot better. So I think it's just like have those
Yeah.
options out there, diversify that pool.
Yeah. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I mean, I think there's also a place to make bigger asks from companies that are prioritizing, the games that still tackle largely destructive practices within the game narratives, right? So, so like, yeah, not to demonize the practice of continuing those games, but I think it's completely fair for those companies to really consider and have some urgency oppressed on them, to engage externally more. That there is actually a bigger responsibility for them to engage more externally in campaigns that are supporting the environment and supporting more social responsibility, right? So that their narratives within the game might still be driving. aggression, right, as kind of the like the number one drive. Um, but people will be able to see that the spirit behind them is actually being used even more so in a way that's positive, right? So that they don't necessarily believe that what's happening in the narrative of the game is what they believe and are practicing outside of that. You know what I mean? So I think that would really send a great signal that that's really not happening yet. To see companies being willing to do that. And there's great examples already too that prioritizing that. Campaigns that are meant to really support reforestation and healthy campaigns that are helping to rebuild our world, right? Um, will mean you're somehow making a sacrifice. I mean, I've seen, in fact, just within the Playing for the Planet, activations, right? I saw one campaign, it was a like green nudging type campaign, and yet the following campaign for that same game was a celebrity branded driven campaign, right? And guess which one performed better? The green one. The Playing for the Planet one outperformed a branded one with celebrities posting about it. So like it's not impossible. It's such a fallacy, right? That doing so, like engaging in social good is somehow, something you're kind of sacrificing for the greater good. Not sacrificing. Like these things can actually perform just as well, if not better.
I
And
think
you're
that's a
also
nice.
yeah, and yeah,
Sorry.
exactly. And what a great message to deliver to your players that you can make any kind of narrative for them. But what you're trying to do is instill an idea, just like you're talking about, where it's clear you're not really, pushing an apathy, on them. That we're really just trying to embrace destruction. Nah, I think we're really just trying to build outlets for people. And if that outlet is, hey, get some steam off by playing Call of Duty or whatever, great. Like there's a place for that. But we're not really supporting going out and killing people. We want you to actually do some good. And so yeah, so that's why I really try and use those opportunities to share with those companies about mental health too. Same conversation, right? That those are opportunities for them to do some good. Um, and that I think also helps fight that stigma that games are still given, that games somehow impacts people more than they do about what they do in their lives, or influences them in a certain way. So yeah, so I really hope we can impress that urgency more. Yeah, on how companies respond.
I think the sorry, gotta write it out. Ooh. Um, the the idea that these campaigns, these kind of activation campaigns, the things that come out of like the Green Game Jam and stuff like that, um, they really do prove, like to your point, that I guess I'll just say gamers care. Gamers care a lot more than is perceived than they used to. Like it's definitely gotten better over time.
Mm,
I had very early publisher conversations for the game we were working on, and a lot of the feedback I was getting around the kind of like, yeah, we want to kind of create a pathway for players to go out and actually have an impact in the real world. Is that, oh, no, 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 gamers don't care. Gamers don't care. Gamers they don't care. They just want the dopamine, dude. And it's just not true. It's just not true anymore. Gamers are some of the most passionate
yeah.
and engaged and engageable people out there, and there's so much data to prove that now.
It's also
Honestly,
so
if you,
insulting and alienating for whoever said that. Like
yeah,
you're literally just insulting your audience.
yeah, and it's also, it comes back on the developers, because if the perception is the gamers don't care, then the developer has no angle to feel like, oh yeah, I did a good thing. I'm really doing the right thing here with my life.
Yeah.
They don't have anything to kind of latch onto for that. Whereas, even if you are developing Call of Duty, um, but you have this campaign going or something like that, where it's like, yeah, uh, you know, every 10 kills will plant a tree or something like that. Even at the most basic thing, I know those thematically mix like oil and water, but still, it's like, hey, we did a good thing today with a thing that's already happening. it's going to happen anyway. We might as
Right.
well, use that flow and direct it towards something good. Which I guess is kind of the whole point of the Green Game Jam. But it's exposing a degree of care and interest, both from
Mhm.
gamers and developers, to kind of be part of something bigger, to kind of
Yeah.
engage with stuff that isn't just within the scope of their game.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because otherwise, those are missed opportunities. I mean, I think one of the big things that stuff like the Green Game Jam is really helping is people also have been so used to sitting back and assuming that unless what you're making, unless your game is you know ideologically activist, right? Like at some point in its narrative, then there's not a seat for you at the table, and we know that's completely false, and that's the whole point of groups like the Playing for the Planet Alliance, right? It's not about the ask isn't that every game now has to be about let's save the planet together, and um, it's your game could be literally about anything, but especially really popular games, right? You know that you have a lot of people paying attention to what you're creating and spending a lot of time. I mean, I know the games that have been, my most popular, I've spent years playing the same game, you know, right? So that's way more time you're spending, with a potentially a singular creation than for most mediums, right? Um, so you know that you have a chance to really impact your audience in a unique way, and potentially with a lot of eyeballs. So it really doesn't matter what story you're telling within the game. There's an opportunity there, yeah, to activate people into something outside the game, and if that helps drive some purpose, because I think it does. I don't care what game I'm playing. If I saw an activation like that, it would turn me into a more loyal player for that game, because I think this is awesome. Like, they realize the opportunity they have, and yeah. So I just think it's about connecting the dots and also making people realize that, uh, like, it doesn't make them a hypocrite. If you're making Grand Theft Auto and you want to engage in a like a Playing for the Planet campaign, for example, right? That's great. That's progress. We want everyone there. That's the goal. It's not about, looking for reasons to turn people away. And uh, you know, what is it? It's also not about convincing people who are already focused on what we can do. A lot of times, the worst offenders out there make the best test cases for turning people around. You know what I mean? Because then if people kind of live in that middle, who are a bit apathetic or don't really care, or they care and they don't really think that they're going to make a difference, but when they see people who have very publicly been part of the problem start becoming part of the solution and at least supporting solutions in some way, yeah, that's some of the most effective, ways you can get people to turn around. So yeah, I I like trying hard to convince people.
I think that that convincing exercise is something that has to be done pretty subtly if you're going to put it in the game as
Yeah,
well. And I think the games are very on the nose about it. And this is true of mental health stuff as well. You see, there's a lot of like bordering edutainment games out there
mhm,
that are about mental health things, but they're ostensibly about mental health issues or climate issues or insert purpose here. You call them serious games or whatever, where
yeah,
it's like, hi, we're making a game about this thing. We're very loud about the fact that it's about that thing. Please buy it because it's about that thing. Who ends up buying that? They already converted almost exclusively. The people who already kind of like, you're just kind of spinning your wheels. You're not really changing any
right.
minds. Whereas if you, let's say, my favorite case example of this is Celeste. Fantastic platformer. Did not market itself about being anxiety at all. I mean, you could tell the character was anxious, but there weren't like anxiety as like a feature or like
Yeah,
it's like a narrative trope or anything like that. It was just featured really well within this thing. And because so much of that audience of that game was like people who just like really hard platformers, you got this whole touch point of like, oh wow, all those people who may or may not have had anxiety have now seen this very accurate and helpful representation of how it manifests, how you manage it, that kind of thing. And it's like the magic mushroom you snuck into the soup, and they took it on. It's impactful without being overt and loud about it. And
Yeah.
I think games can do a lot of that as well. I think there's two approaches. There's that more subtle, like, oh, we're going to expertly weave this in there without making it the primary focus of the game.
Yeah.
And then there's, hi, yeah, this game is ostensibly about murdering each other. But for every bank you rob, we're going to like save this species or something like that. And yeah, the group playing that game has a very high likelihood of not already being like a climate warrior or a mental health advocate
Right.
or something like
Exactly.
that. So the people you reach are more likely to be maybe not necessarily open to changing their mind or adopting a new
Yeah.
viewpoint on something, but it's certainly going to have a higher success rate than preaching to the choir. And I
Well,
think we
right,
do
and you're
this way
still
too
getting
much.
those. Yeah, and you're still getting those people who wouldn't necessarily voluntarily go out there and say become an activist, or something like that. You're still getting them to support the progress, right? And you haven't, really messed with the narrative that they're comfortable with, playing games, right? So that they feel that their game experience has been hijacked by a mission, right? You hear that a lot. Oh, it's been hijacked so that I can be pushed, had an agenda pushed on me, or something like that, right? That's why it's great. Yeah, you don't have to necessarily mess with the mechanics of the gameplay in order to get people to support the progress. That's why some of these subtle campaigns are actually kind of ingenious in that way. And that's why I also appreciate small gestures in games. Yeah, you were talking about a game like Celeste. One I've mentioned frequently as a favorite of mine is Sky Children of the Light, because I really appreciate the gesture of holding hands. That the like the mechanic of holding hands within the game literally helps you progress through the game better, because it's literally like the game helps you, because you can meet other players in the game and then you hold hands and you essentially team up with them, and it's super subtle, but I love the message that sends. And it literally is a game where if you want, like, you can progress by yourself, but if you want to actually do better, you have a better chance by basically kind of befriending other players in the world, and the way you do that isn't by chatter and stuff, which can be iffy, right? For who you're meeting, but it's just hold hands. You can like send a signal and hold hands with people. So I love those kind of mechanics where whoever thought of that probably didn't think it was any big deal at the time, but I love the message that those kind of subtle things say, because it's all about the spirit of communion, not dominion. you know yeah, so that's one of my favorite examples.
Awesome. Well, we've had you for about an hour now. So I want to give you the stage to kind of, if anyone's curious about Safe in Our World or really any of the other initiatives you're into, so how can they engage? If you're a game developer and maybe you're kind of looking for mental health resources outside of work, or you're a game studio founder and you're looking for ways to create a safe workplace. What are some of the touch points and ways to take advantage of Safe in Our World?
Yeah, so I mean, anyone that works in games, individuals can sign up for our training, just as companies can. So I really encourage anyone who's interested. A lot of our resources are free on our website, safeinourworld.org. We have a podcast called Safe Space. We have a Discord called Safer Together. So there, and we're active on all the traditional socials. So it should be easy for people to be able to find us and start getting an idea of what we're about, because we're really here to serve game developers, right? People who work in this industry, people who make games. That's really our mission. And but also, anyone out there, encourage the companies that you're in. Ask your manager, like, hey, if you guys engage with Safe in Our World, that would be really helpful for everyone. uh, you know to at least explore, how we can be helpful, because that's what we're here to do. That's what Safe in Our World is here to do, is to just be a helpful resource, so that we can make the process of making games one that's, safer and more fun and healthier, right? Where people feel taken care of. Yeah, and that's it. So, people can, and there's all kinds of ways people can engage, where we, give a lot of talks at events. We, you know, consult on stuff. We're trying to do stuff directly in games, right? How can we get like mental health signposting in games? How do we, in-game charity sponsorships? And anyone can sign up to like our trainings and stuff. So, um, yeah, yeah, I just
Excellent.
just really encourage
Well,
it.
thank you for your time. And sorry, everybody, for the feedback. But yeah, if you're interested in following up with Ben, obviously take him up on any of those touch points. Just look up Safe in Our World and you'll find a way to engage. If you're interested in us, in the Climate SIG, and getting involved, um, you can check us out at igdaclimatesig.org. We have a very, very active Discord community that has created things like this podcast and stream. Um, and yeah, both places are fantastic. If you are in the industry and you're just looking for ways to thrive and not just get through the day, so you want to feel like you can use your work for good and do and be better at work, then both these groups are your port of call. So I just want to say thank you again, Ben, for coming on and sharing
Oh,
your
thank you
time
guys.
and wisdom with us, and very, very happy to have had a conversation with you.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Bye.